Hi, everyone. I hope you're all keeping well. My name is Rahul, one of the co-founders of Travel the Unknown. And thank you for joining us today on our talk on Brazil, known for its luxuriant rainforests, the mighty Amazon, incredible biodiversity, and hedonistic festivals. Brazil is all this and much, much more. We're very pleased to have our colleague Judith Mutici join us from Brazil. And I know she's very excited to be taking you on a journey through her adopted country, which we will be referring to as the Passion America. So I will go over the usual housekeeping rules. I'll be as brief as possible, and then I'll hand over to Judith, who will give you a taster of Brazil. And then I'll give a very brief overview of our tours there, followed by the question and answers. So as some of you may have heard already, please keep microphones muted at all times. Please keep your videos safe. It ensures we get better quality presentation. For the question and answer session, any questions that have been submitted using the chat function. But again, for those using a desktop or a laptop, you should see a chat option at the bottom of your screen. If you're using a mobile device, the chat option is via the participants button. And hopefully we won't have any internet issues, but if we do, they will be only temporary. And so I want to tell you a little bit more about our speaker. Yeah, it was an exchange program which first took her to Brazil. Since when, she's returned there many times, and for the past 5 years, Recife in northeastern Brazil has been her home. We've been working with her ever since we launched our tours in Brazil, and she's responsible for helping us curate our tours there, as well as overseeing our operations in the country. So Judith, I'm going to hand over to you, and if you don't mind sharing your screen, please, that'd be great.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. So, well, Rahul, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. And I very much look forward to taking you on a short but hopefully inspiring journey through Brazil. I would like to open with this map, which I think is really helpful to visualize how big a country Brazil is. Yeah. If we look at Brazil on this map, we can see that it's pretty much half of the South American continent. And that is both in terms of size and also population. And in fact, there are only 2 countries in South America that we don't share a border with, which are Ecuador and Chile. And if we take a closer look, you will probably be surprised to hear that just the state of São Paulo is pretty much the same size as the UK. And if you look at this map, you can see that São Paulo isn't even one of the big Brazilian states. So this really says something. And for travelers in Brazil, this means on the one hand that traveling in Brazil without domestic flights is very difficult and not at all recommendable. And it also means that you really should plan enough time for your first trip to Brazil. I think that typically for a round trip, about 3 weeks would be a good duration to get a real idea of the country and not just check off the highlights. Unlike most Latin American countries, Brazil was colonized by the Portuguese. And the Portuguese fleet arrived on the northeast coast of Brazil in 1500. And for more than 300 years, Brazil was part of the Portuguese colonial empire. And of course, this chapter of Brazilian history has left a heritage, which is still visible in many Brazilian cities, where we have very well preserved historic centers. The example I'm showing you in this picture is one of the many churches of Olinda, close to where I live in northeastern Brazil. And the historic center of Olinda was actually declared a World Heritage Site by the UNESCO. And of course, another remainder of the colonial period in Brazil is the language we speak, which is Portuguese, not Spanish, like most our neighboring countries. And one of the things that fascinate me the most about Brazil is how diverse the country is culturally. Most historians speak about three ethnic groups, which are supposed to be the foundation of the Brazilian nation or the Brazilian national identity. But the truth is that there are many more. So while history usually speaks about the indigenous, the Portuguese, and the Africans who were brought to Brazil as slaves, the truth is that over the centuries, Brazil received large waves of immigrants from all over the world. And each and every one of these communities contributed and helped shape the Brazilian culture as we know it today. So one example for such a community are the Japanese. Brazil is actually home to the largest Japanese community outside of Japan. And a little fun fact on the side, every year the city of Blumenau in the very south of Brazil hosts the third biggest Oktoberfest in the world. Yeah, so really a lot of diversity we have around here. And diverse is also the adjective that I would use to describe Brazil as a tourist destination. We have cosmopolitan cities like Rio de Janeiro. We have beautiful nature with over 70 national parks around the country. We have a lot of culture and history, like our futuristic capital, Brasilia, which was founded and built in 1960, when the decision was made that the country's capital should no longer be Rio de Janeiro, but that it should be relocated to the geographic center of the country, which back then was literally in the middle of nowhere. We also have amazing wildlife in Brazil, like this friendly tapir photographed in the Pantanal. And of course, with a 7,500 kilometer long coastline, we have beaches for every taste. And we're also famous for hosting one of the biggest celebrations in the world, which is Rio Carnival. And every year in February or March, depending on the year, the famous Carnival parade takes place in a special venue, which is called Sambódromo. And there, the city's samba schools compete for the title. So Rio Carnival is a celebration, but at the same time, it's also a very fierce competition. And the samba schools prepare literally during the entire year for this moment, for the parade. And at the parade, they try to outshine the other samba schools with gigantic carnival floats, like the one we can see in the picture, and well-trained performances that typically involve around 3,000 participants per samba school. Yeah. So Rio Carnival really is a huge spectacle, and there's so much energy involved that it's really hard to find words to even describe it. And while Rio Carnival attracts hundreds of thousands of tourists every year, there are other carnival celebrations all over Brazil that are just as amazing, just as colorful, and just as exciting, but far less known. And a good example for this is the Carnival of Olinda, which is considered to be one of the biggest street carnivals in Brazil. Yeah, so a street carnival means there is no fancy parade, there are no glamorous carnival floats, there are no expensive entrance tickets either. It's just thousands and thousands of people out in the streets, having a good time together and celebrating their local culture and traditions. And one of the very peculiar traditions of Olinda Carnival are the bonecos gigantes, which are these giant puppets, which we can see in the picture, and they are paraded across town in the middle of the crowd. So, as you can see, for a first-time visitor, there's an awful lot to do in Brazil, and it's impossible to squeeze it all into one trip. So, to still give you an idea of what a round trip through Brazil could look like, I have put together an itinerary with a few of my personal favorite destinations. Yeah. So, we're going to start in Rio. then head down to Paraty and the waterfalls of Iguazu, then fly up to the north to the Amazon region with Manaus, fly down to the Pantanal, and finish the trip back on the coast in the city of Salvador in the northeast. Most international visitors, they arrive in Brazil via Rio de Janeiro, and it's definitely the most touristy city we have in Brazil. It's our big highlight, so to say. And if it's your first time in Rio, I really recommend that you do visit all the highlights. Yeah? Take the cable car up Sugarloaf Mountain, go see the famous Christ the Redeemer statue. Even if it's a cliche, it's worth it. And in Brazil, we call Rio a Cidade Maravilhosa, which means the marvelous city. And this is mainly because of the beautiful city landscape that we have in Rio, with all the green mountains and always the ocean as backdrop. So yeah, a visit to either Corcovado or Sugarloaf will definitely get you an amazing panoramic view over the city where you can really enjoy the landscape. And I also really recommend that you plan in some time to mingle with the locals. Rio is a great place to do that. And the Cariocas, as we call the inhabitants of Rio, they are known for being especially outgoing and especially fun-loving. So I think that your Rio experience just wouldn't be complete if you didn't spend at least one night out having a few caipirinhas and maybe enjoy some live music, like the improvised samba session we can see in this picture. After a few days in the big city, you might be in the mood for something a little bit slower paced, and the colonial town of Paraty is just perfect for that. It's only a 5 to 4 hour drive down the coast, and you will find yourself in a completely different world. Paraty used to be of great historic importance during the colonial period, because the town was one of the main ports that the Portuguese used to ship the Brazilian gold to Portugal. And nowadays, there's no busy port anymore. It's just a really pretty, charming, well-preserved colonial town, and also surrounded by beautiful nature. Yeah, it's located on a stretch of coastline that we call the Green Coast, and it's covered in Atlantic rainforest vegetation. So I used to live in Paraty, which means that I'm probably a little biased, but for me it is one of the most beautiful towns in Brazil. Well, from Paraty, it's on to our next big highlights, which are the waterfalls of Iguazu. As you probably know, we share the waterfalls, the Iguazu Falls, with our Argentine neighbors. And when you go there, you really should visit both sides of the falls. Yeah? The two sides of the falls are two completely different experiences. On the Argentine side, you will get really close to the falls. Yeah? You will really get to feel all the power of the water. Whereas from the Brazilian side, you will get an excellent panoramic view. And if you're up for a little adventure, you will have the opportunity to take a boat trip, which will get you very close to the water, and you will really feel the power of the elements there. And get really wet too, so be prepared for that. Good, so from Foz to Iguazu, we are going to take a flight across the country up to the very north of Brazil, to Manaus. Manaus is the main gateway to the Brazilian Amazon region, and one of the big highlights of the city is the Teatro Amazonas, the famous opera house. This opera house was built during the so-called rubber boom, which was a period of great wealth in the region of Manaus at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century. Yeah? And if we think that back then the only way to reach Manaus was by boat, over the river, it's just all the more impressive how such an extravagant opera house could be built. One of the other highlights in Manaus is a visit to the municipal market, which is a great introduction to all the exotic things that come from the Amazon. Yeah? So at the market, you're going to be able to see really, really big river fish, which you don't find anywhere else in the world. You're going to see lots of exotic fruits and all sorts of medicinal herbs, etc., etc. Yeah? So it really is a great place to spend the morning and just be curious and look around. And with all those exotic local products, of course, Manaus is also a really good place to try some typical food, which even in other regions of Brazil, you will have difficulty finding. Yeah, just to give you two examples, in this picture we have the very tangy and local tacacá soup, and acai berries, which are considered a superfood nowadays, and they are an essential part of the Amazonian diet. But well, the actual reason for our trip to Manaus is, of course, the Amazon rainforest. And I have chosen this picture because for me personally, it really sums up the Amazon experience. Yeah? It's just complete immersion. It's nothing but water, the river, the rainforest, and all the sounds of the hidden wildlife in the trees. Yeah, and when I say hidden wildlife, this is actually quite an important point, because if it's your first time in the Amazon, don't expect to see wildlife everywhere. Don't expect to see jaguars and anacondas all the time. Yeah, you will get disappointed. There is a huge variety of wildlife in the Amazon, but it's in a wild animal's nature to hide. And of course, the very dense vegetation of the rainforest is perfect for that. Yeah? So often the animals are going to be hidden and hard to spot, but luckily we have very, very good guides in that region that have well-trained eyes, and they're going to make sure you still get to see a lot of interesting things. And one very typical animal of the Amazon region you have very good chances to see, and it's the boto, the pink river dolphin. They're funny looking creatures, and they're also a very important part of the local folklore. So according to local legends, in nights of full moon, the boto, he turns into a very handsome young gentleman that seduces the virgins of the villages by the river. Yeah? But of course, there's no actual proof for that. It's all just a legend. Well, regarding accommodation in the Amazon, you have a variety of lodges to choose from. And for me personally, one important aspect would be the lodge's location. So I will definitely always opt for a lodge that's really deep inside the jungle, far away from the lights of the city. And a great example for this is Wakari Lodge, which is a completely floating structure located in the nature reserve of Mamirawa, which is especially popular with bird watchers. Yeah, so another place of great biodiversity. And well, from the Amazon, we're going to head down to Cuiabá, which is one of the gateways to the Pantanal region. The Pantanal is the largest tropical wetland area in the world, and it definitely is the best place for wildlife spotting in Brazil. There you have a chance to see it all. The symbol animal of the Pantanal is the jabiru stork, which we call tuyuyu because of the sound it makes. And apart from the tuyuyu, there is a big variety of other bird life. So also for bird watchers, the Pantanal definitely is a must-go destination. And apart from bird life, we have all sorts of mammals like capybaras, which are literally everywhere in the Pantanal. We have giant river otters, giant anteaters, and also giant cats, or to be more specific, the jaguar. which of course is one of the big highlights of every visit to the Pantanal. And while the Pantanal is a destination that can be visited all year round, there is a specific time of the year for jaguar spotting. So if your main goal is to see jaguars in the Pantanal, you should go between June, July and October, November, which is the dry season in the Pantanal. And it's also the time of the year where the jaguars are forced to come to the river shores to drink and hunt, which is when we get a chance to see them. And well, when it comes to Mother Nature, it's never possible to guarantee anything. But if you go to the right places in the Pantanal during that time of year, you actually have a very, very good chance to see at least one jaguar during your stay, probably more. On my last trip to the Pantanal, I got especially lucky. That was last year in October, and I got to see this scene of a jaguar hunting down an alligator, which was just impressive. And of course, everything happened so quick that it was over before I even realized what was going on. But luckily, I was traveling with a professional photographer who was quicker than me and well, managed to register this very unique moment. Well, and this already brings us to the last stop of our trip, which is the city of Salvador on the northeast coast. Salvador is another example of a beautiful colonial town with great examples of Baroque colonial architecture. And what makes Salvador so special is that it's also the city in Brazil where the African heritage is the most alive, the most visible. Yeah? And it's really, it can be seen in any aspect of the local culture. So it's in food, music, even religion. And the ladies that we can see in this picture are known as baianas. And they have become one of the symbols of the city of Salvador. And all over the city, they can be seen on the streets in their typical white dresses and turbans. And quite often they sell street food. Like the plate of acarajé the lady in the picture is preparing. And well, of course, Salvador is also a city of music. They are home to some of the best percussion groups we have in Brazil. And the most famous of these percussion groups is probably Olodum, who made quite a lot of international success in the 1990s when they shot a music video with Michael Jackson, which you might have seen at some point. And in terms of accommodation in Salvador, we have very nice boutique hotel options right in the heart of the historic center. And one that I find particularly interesting is Solar dos Deuses, which is a small bed and breakfast. And it's entirely dedicated to the theme of candomblé. Candomblé is an Afro-Brazilian religion that is very popular in Salvador and all that region of Brazil. And at Solar dos Deuses, each of the rooms is dedicated to one of the deities of the Candomblé religion, which are called orixás. Yeah? So, for example, we have the red room, which is dedicated to the orixá Xangô, who is the god of justice, and he is typically associated with the element of fire and thunder and lightning. The blue room in the picture below is dedicated to Iemanjá, who is the goddess of fertility, and she is associated with the ocean and very often depicted as a mermaid. And Iemanjá is actually one of the most popular orixás in Brazil. And the city of Salvador each year on February 2nd celebrates a huge festival in her honor, where thousands of people gather by the beach and make flower offerings to the goddess of the ocean. Yeah. It's a very beautiful celebration. And well, this already brings me to the end of our quick round trip through Brazil. And this is where I have to hand back over to Raul.
Thank you very much, Judith, for taking us on this incredible trip through Brazil. Again, for those of you who might not have traveled with us before or joined one of our talks before, just a very quick recap of what we do. So we run small group tours. We've now reduced the group size from 12 to 8. We also organize private and tailor-made tours. We've got a very good personal knowledge of our destinations, and obviously we have people like Judith who help us, design these really wonderful itineraries. And we've obviously been working with them for some years, and we have access to some really excellent and knowledgeable guides. We've been recommended by major guidebooks. We're ATOL bonded, and we were the winners of the British Travel Awards. And in terms of some of our tours, our classic Brazil tour, it's kind of ideal for the first-time visitor. And as you'll see from the places mentioned there, Judith had also spoken about those during her talk. And it's a 14-day trip. And again, of course, it's going to be extended if required. And there's more details on our website. We do a very off the beaten track tour in Brazil as well. So this might be ideal for someone visiting the country for, on a second visit or third visit, or if you want to extend your trip, you have longer to travel, you're able to, experience some other hidden parts of the country. And this is a fantastic tour. And we do try to schedule one of the departures with the festival, which Judith talked about towards the end of her presentation. Again, a major highlight of any trip to Brazil is the wildlife. This tour in particular takes in the Amazon and the Pantanal, which is the key region that real wildlife lovers have to visit if they're going to go on such a trip. As was mentioned on our last talk, we are running a zero deposit scheme, which is actually going to finish at the end of this month. So one can hold a place on a group tour at no cost. And for a tailor-made trip, there is a £500 deposit, which is fully refundable if the trip can't run due to obviously the current COVID-19 problems. Once the tour is considered viable, then the deposit of 20% would be typically payable, and the balance due shortly before the departure date. And again, there's full details about that on our website, and you can see the website address there. In terms of practicalities, Brazil is obviously a very, very long way away, but it's actually only 3 hours, or currently 4 hours behind UK time, so it's GMT -3. There are direct flight options from the UK, Europe, and the US. Visas are not required for UK travelers, and only recently, it was last year, I think, that they introduced visa-free travel for US and Australian citizens, and also many other EU countries as well have visa-free access. The currency there is the real, and ATMs again are available throughout Brazil. As Judith mentioned, Brazil really is a year-round destination, but there are obviously regional differences. And she spoke about some of the best months to travel, and one of those that she mentioned was September to October. I have mentioned yellow fever certificate here. We say it's advisable. Obviously, it depends on which country you may have entered Brazil from. So it's just worth bearing that in mind. Okay, so if we want to head to the questions now, I've got a few questions here. Judith, some people have asked, obviously you talked about wildlife in Brazil, and obviously it's a major highlight. Outside of the Amazon and the Pantanal, is there anywhere else that you would recommend for that extra time?
The Amazon and the Pantanal, they're definitely the big highlights when it comes to wildlife spotting in Brazil. But depending on the specific interest that you have, other regions could be interesting as well. So, for example, for bird watchers, I think that the entire Atlantic rainforest area could be really interesting, which is the area of Foz do Iguaçu, as well as the part around Rio de Janeiro, Paraty, etc. Yeah, so that's an area for great bird watching. And in the interior of Brazil, you get local highlights, like, for example, regions where you can spot the maned wolf, which is quite rare. And yeah, so there are other places as well.
Yeah, and in terms of like pre-colonial sites, are there any particular places in Brazil that you recommend, or?
I don't think that this really is something that that Brazil would be the perfect destination for. Yeah, we don't have anything that compares to other pre-Columbian sites that you can see in South America.
Right.
What you can do is there are some indigenous communities that work with community-based tourism. So of course there you can get an idea of their traditions, of their way of life. Yeah, but yeah, archaeological sites in that way we don't really have. Not really.
Another question is, I mean, you know, is Brazil safe for travelers? I mean, what would your response be to that?
It's a very popular question, and well, I've lived here for a long time, and I say yes, it is. You just have to be smart about how you behave. Yeah, like you have to do in any big city, especially in Latin America. So if you don't wear big jewelry, if you don't walk around on the streets in the middle of the night, you're most probably going to be fine. Yeah.
Right.
And just listen to the recommendations of the local guides. I think that's a good tip.
Mm-hmm.
And they will tell you, you know, if there are any parts of the city that you should avoid, any streets or neighborhoods.
And someone has also asked, is there much to see in Sao Paulo?
There is a lot to see in Sao Paulo. It's a huge, huge city. And I think that it really depends on the specific interests a person has. If you're interested in art, if you enjoy going to museums, then definitely Sao Paulo is the best place in Brazil for you. Yeah. Also, if you enjoy gastronomy, Sao Paulo has the best restaurants in all of Brazil. So there are things to see there. But I think that for the typical traveler profile, Rio has much more to offer. Now, if you want to compare these two large cities.
Sure. Okay. And again, you touched on this just in one of your previous answers. I mean, how easy would it be, or how accessible are some of the tribes in Brazil if one wanted to kind of, you know, visit some kind of indigenous communities or tribes?
So fortunately, I have to say, the indigenous communities in Brazil, they're quite well protected. So it's not possible for a tourist to just go visit an isolated tribe in the middle of the Amazon, which is a good thing at the end of the day. But as I mentioned earlier, there are a few communities that do receive tourists or visitors and who have learned to use community-based tourism as a source of income for themselves. So there are some possibilities there. Definitely in the Amazon region, but not only. So actually there are indigenous tribes still nowadays all over Brazil.
Okay, great. And what about for trekking? I mean, are there any nice options that you can suggest in Brazil for trekking?
So as I mentioned earlier, we have over 70 national parks in Brazil. So yes, we do have great locations for hiking and trekking. And one of the most typical destinations for this would be the Chapada Diamantina National Park, which is about 7 hours by bus inland from Salvador, so in the northeast of Brazil. And it's a beautiful area with caves and waterfalls, etc. So very interesting. And what's a nice contrast compared to the landscape you will find there is the region around Paraty, which is Atlantic rainforest vegetation. And there you can do really, really nice trekkings along the beaches. Yeah, always inside the Atlantic rainforest. So.
Okay, well, that sounds good. And again, you mentioned very briefly about Iguazu Falls in the south. If one did want to cross to the Argentinian side, how do the border formalities work? I mean, is it fairly straightforward, or?
It's very straightforward. So obviously Foz do Iguaçu on the Brazilian side and also Puerto Iguaçu on the Argentinian side, they live off tourism. So it's in their best interest to just keep things as simple as possible. And it will always depend on the day, yeah, on the movement, but it's usually really quick to cross the border. And Iguazu is also a great way if you want to combine Argentina and Brazil in one trip. Yeah, so we receive a lot of travelers who do that, and they usually fly from Buenos Aires to Puerto Iguazu on the Argentinian side, and then cross over to Brazil and start their trip through Brazil there.
Sure, great. And again, you touched on, I guess, the culinary diversity of Brazil. What's it like for vegetarians?
So I am a vegetarian, and I won't lie to you. Brazil is meat eaters' paradise. So obviously one of the most popular things to do around here is churrasco, which is Brazilian barbecue. Yeah. But it is possible to eat very well as a vegetarian, and it keeps getting better. Yeah. So definitely in all big cities, you're going to find very good vegetarian options. And also most lodges, be it in the Pantanal or in the Amazon, they're very well prepared to cater for vegetarians. You just have to let them know in advance. Yeah. Right. And one of the highlights for vegetarians are also all the tropical fruits that we have in Brazil. So, yeah.
Great. And also, yeah, you mentioned in the Amazon, one shouldn't kind of get one's hopes up too much in terms of seeing kind of, say, big wildlife. So what would one typically do, say, for 2-3 days in the Amazon? I mean, what would be a typical itinerary for those days?
So the lodges in the Amazon and also in the Pantanal, they usually work with packages that include full board and also activities, which usually take part in small groups. Yeah? And in the Amazon, you would typically do a lot of canoe tours, yeah, where you just go out on the river in small boats and you keep looking at the river shore for wildlife. You're also going to do jungle hikes, yeah, which gives you a completely different perspective of the rainforest. And most lodges also offer visits to local communities they partner with. And that's really interesting. And it's not indigenous communities per se, as one might imagine, but it's people, it's communities of people that live by the river. Yeah, and so it's a very nice experience to see that kind of lifestyle, which is so different from what we know. And yeah, so that would be the typical program at an Amazon lodge. Okay, a combination of jungle hikes and boat tours, maybe some kayaking if you're up for the adventure.
Sure. And in terms of, I guess, other kind of key cultural places, obviously we had a very limited time to talk today. You touched on Salvador, Paraty. Are there any other kind of major towns that you think, again, if one had longer, one should visit if they had extra time?
It's hard to say because we have many cities in Brazil. Yeah. Again, it will depend on your specific interests. So if you're interested in architecture, for example, I think that you really shouldn't miss out on Brasilia, which, as I said, is a very unique city with all its futuristic architecture, and very modern buildings, and so that's definitely a highlight. And if you're interested in, for example, if you like reggae music, you would probably enjoy going to São Luís, which is in the very north of the Brazilian northeast. So there's many cities to visit. Yeah.
Okay, great. And I saw a question from John Hag, who said that, yeah, I mean, is it possible to do a visit of the colonial cities minus the Amazon? Absolutely. We can tailor a tour according to people's interests, so that's not a problem at all. And I mean, obviously, although this is not a presentation about COVID-19, but it is a question that, does raise its head. Obviously, we know that at the moment there are travel restrictions and no one has a crystal ball, but when do you hope that people can start to travel to Brazil again?
It's a tricky question because the official information that we have at the moment is that the borders will remain closed until the end of July. That's the only official information there is at the moment, but personally I think it's very likely that that the restrictions are going to be extended for another 30 days probably, which would mean end of August. Yeah. And I guess then we'll see.
I mean, what we are recommending clients to do is essentially start planning for 2021, really, because of the uncertainty. Hopefully by then, there'll be a better, grip on the situation worldwide, we hope. So I guess anyone who is trying to potentially go to Brazil or elsewhere, of course, I would start probably thinking about either very late 2020 or into 2021.
Exactly. Yeah.
Great.
For existing bookings, it might be possible to start coming here in maybe October already, but it's hard to tell really. Yeah.
Sorry, one question I missed here was: is there any annual music festival in Brazil?
Annual music festivals?
Yeah.
So I'm not an expert on that. Yeah, I don't want to lie, but we have several across the country, and a famous one is obviously Rock in Rio. Yeah, which isn't annual. I think it's every other year, but that would be one of the big highlights. Yeah, we also have a version of Lollapalooza now and many others. Yeah, so if you're into music, you're gonna find the entertainment you're looking for. Great.
Well, then that's everything. Thank you, Judith. Thank you very much again for your time. And for those who are enjoying our presentations, I'm pleased to say we have more talks lined up. So we have a talk in 2 weeks' time on Cambodia, followed 2 weeks later by another big country in South America, Colombia. And on 2nd of September, we will be doing some more kind of a historical journey through North India. So I hope that, as many of you as possible can join us for those. And once again, I'd like to thank Judith for joining us and for you for listening. There's more information on our field tours on our website, traveltheunknown.com/Brazil. And until 5th of August, hope you all have a good evening. Thank you. Thank you, Judith.
Thank you.
Yep.